Following the Second World War, there were dozens of convicted war criminals who were led from their prison cells in Landsberg Prison to the gallows that was found inside of the courtyard of the American-occupied prison. It was on this execution structure that some of the most evil concentration camp guards, ruthless death squad overseers and barbaric criminals were condemned on. Landsberg Prison was the very place where Adolf Hitler had been imprisoned following his failed attempt to seize power in Munich and to bring revolution in Germany. It was where Hitler was held in comfort, where he could very easily have been executed for treason, and whilst there he wrote Mein Kampf, and he was waited on by his inner circle and close friends, such as Rudolf Hess. But Landsberg became one of the most prolific sites in the post-Second World War Europe that would see scores of condemned Nazis being sent to await their date with the executioner. The gallows here claimed many lives, even on the same day. Join us today to look at the executions of Landsberg Prison, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Landsberg Prison was built at the beginning of the 20th century, and construction took 3 years between 1905 and 1908. To begin with, it was planned that the site would hold around 500 inmates, and then at the end of the First World War, it was used as a place for fortress imprisonment. This was said to have been a comfortable form of imprisonment of prisoners who were privileged and wealthy, and there were many inmates who had easy lifestyles inside of the site. This later, as mentioned, included Adolf Hitler, who was allowed many visitors when he had been sent there for treason, and it was a place where many political prisoners would be locked behind bars. When Hitler seized control, it became a place which was a Nazi fortress, and it was where many people were sent to before they were sent on to concentration camps or other sites of incarceration. For example, in 1942, there were 4 policemen sentenced in the Guernsey police trials who were sent to Landsberg before they were sent onto concentration camps. But the prison was where a number of evil Nazi doctors conducted strange operations and experiments upon the inmates. For example, in 1943, there was a prisoner named Alfred Baker who claimed about his treatment that, firstly, I am scarred for life, left lower jaw, owing to the fact that I was run down, lost weight to 52 kilos, and they had to operate on me. That was at Landsberg, Lech, Germany, at the foot of some mountains. The doctor said to me, I can't give you more food, as you are my enemy. The day after the operation, I had to go straight to work, forced labour. I also had abscesses in my ear a little time after the operation. On entering Buchenwald horror camp, I was kicked to hell by a big Nazi. Landsberg's conditions during the Second World War were rather varied depending on the prisoner, and some inmates lived and had little problems, but others had to conduct more stricter work, doing jobs such as peeling potatoes in the kitchen, but they would be overseen by a number of guards whose brutality varied. However, as the Second World War continued, the conditions and harshness of Landsberg Prison got worse, as it's said that at least 210 people died there due to either being starved to death or being executed by the Nazi authorities. But Landsberg became even more infamous at the end of the Second World War, as it was a place of imprisonment for Nazi war criminals and those awaiting trial or even execution. It was designated as War Criminal Prison No. 1 by the US Army to hold convicted Nazis, and it was guarded by men of the US Army's military police. There were many former Nazis, concentration camp guards, and members of the SS who were hunted at the end of the Second World War. They were advised by senior Nazis, or the SS, to try and hide out under false identities and papers, but many were captured and during denazification processes were actually uncovered as to their true identity and the crimes they had committed. Those who were arrested varied in their role in the Second World War, from those men of the einsatzgruppe who had physically executed hundreds of thousands inside of Nazi-occupied lands, or even cooks inside of the concentration camps who were accused of slaughtering inmates who were accused of then stealing food. Some of those arrested were even capos, prisoner functionaries who were given jobs and roles inside of the camps by the SS. Landsberg between 1945 and 1946 held 110 prisoners who were convicted at the Nuremberg trials, and hundreds more were held following the Dachau trials, which dealt with prison staff who worked specifically at Dachau. It even held prisoners imprisoned following the Shanghai trials, but it was a place where almost 300 war criminals were executed in around 5.5 years. There were various execution methods used at Landsberg, but the most popular was the gallows and hanging, in which 259 death sentences were carried out in this way. but for those who had been allowed to have a more military-style execution, the firing squad inside the prison claimed the lives of 29. After the trials took place, executions would be carried out sometime later, sometimes even years, and at times there were so many who had been condemned that the executions had to be carried out en masse over consecutive days. This was due to the time being given when the condemned went through the trapdoor before they were pronounced dead. It took 4 days, for example, for SS guards from Dachau concentration camp to be executed consecutively on the gallows. But the executions usually took the same pattern and form using the gallows. The condemned would be kept inside of their prison cell and would have a normal prison life alongside the other criminals until the date of their execution. They usually submitted pleas for clemency too, and they were kept under close watch, and many, including even some female prisoners, shared cells with each other for companionship. They would then be alerted that it was time for their execution. They would be accompanied by many American military policemen and also a priest who remained with them until the final moments. It was the priest's job to offer spiritual guidance in their final moments, and many of the condemned had spent many months and even years knowing the prison chaplain. The priest usually administered also final masses and blessings, and also heard the final words of the condemned. Inside of the courtyard of Landsberg Prison were 2 gallows, which could be used simultaneously to quicken the process of executions up, if there were many people being put to death that day. This meant that 2 people could be hanged at once, then the work of the executioner was swifter. The guards of Landsberg also witnessed the proceedings. They would check the identity of the prisoner at the bottom of the scaffold before they made their way up onto it, where the executioner was waiting. On the scaffold, after being helped up the steps, the executioner checked that their arms and legs were secured. They were then placed over the trapdoor. It was usually at this point where a photographer would take a final photo, with the condemned stood over the trapdoor, being held by 2 military policemen, or the executioner with the noose pulled to the side. Following this, the executioner put a black hood over the head of the condemned, then released a lever, which opened the trapdoor. Then the condemned plunged through the trapdoor. Their bodies were then placed into a coffin after being cut down, and the chance to claim the remains was given to the families. Those who were not claimed were interred inside of a cemetery next to the chapel. It was here where court-martials of American soldiers were also carried out, and also where regular criminals were executed. And one example of this was a murderer and former concentration camp prisoner, Piotr Kemi, who was executed for murdering a German couple and their daughter. But there were a lot of high-ranking members of the SS who were executed at Landsberg, and it was a site which functioned similarly to how the British ran Hamlin Prison, where the main executioner there was Albert Pierpoint. It's believed that infamous US executioner John C. Woods may have carried out a number of botched executions at Landsberg, which did not go well. But some well-known prisoners held at Landsberg include Hitler's former escort doctor Karl Brandt, who was condemned for being involved in the Action T4 program that led to the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of innocent people. He was also executed on the gallows there, as was Oswald Perl, the leader of the SS Main Economic Administrative Office. Another man who ran a concentration camp was Hermann Pister, who was the commandant of Buchenwald, who was also executed at Landsberg. And other prisoners include the infamous war criminal Joachim Peiper, who somehow managed to escape the hangman's noose for his crimes. The last executions that occurred at Landsberg Prison took place on the 7th of June 1951, and then many of the inmates were released. In May 1958, the Americans handed over control of Landsberg back to the Germans, and the final 4 prisoners were released, and these were men who had been convicted during the Einsatzgruppe trial. Landsberg Prison today is still a site of incarceration, and it is a facility that allows prisoners a chance to reform themselves and learn new skills and trades. Around 300 Nazi war criminals were executed inside of Landsberg Prison in the years after the Second World War, either on the gallows or on the firing range. Many of these men were the most evil war criminals of the Nazi regime. They had been responsible for the slaughter and suffering of thousands of people. It was a site in which reprisal was felt every time a condemned man went to the gallows, and the executions continued years after the conflict had come to an end. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.